Welcome back. It is still Wednesday, November 11, 2015. This is still the morning edition on i24 News, and thank you for staying with us, as you should have, because the next one is one of the most fascinating and interesting stories in Israel over the course of the last several weeks. Now, 3 years after Israelis took to the streets en masse in 2011 to protest a slew of social and economic ills, ranging from high housing costs and income gaps to corruption and monopolies, the public seemed to have lost its appetite for demonstrations. Though little has improved since that summer of 2011. Indeed, perhaps because of that, many have become disillusioned about the ability to bring about change. The convergence of two factors coming about at the same time, however, is now threatening to change that status quo, to quote maybe some in the administration. One is the imminent implementation of the government's controversial plan for the handling of Israel's substantial natural gas reserves. The other is a powerful new documentary miniseries laying out the country's economic and social woes that has people once again stirring to rally. A first taste could be seen on Saturday when thousands, for the first time in many months, thousands of Israelis participated in a countrywide protest against the government's gas policy. A second round of demonstration is scheduled to take place this weekend as well. Let's first take a look at the next report about this past weekend in Israel and break it down from there.
Thousands gathered in Tel Aviv on Saturday evening to protest the Israeli government's controversial outline for the country's natural gas reserves. Protesters carried signs that read, "Stopping the Great Gas Robbery," and Netanyahu is only good for Israel's wealthy. Violent clashes broke out between demonstrators and police forces, resulting in several arrests.
It's still not too late. Nothing has been signed yet. No contract has been sealed. We can still stop this, and this is why we want everyone to join us.
The outline of Israel's large natural gas reserves, discovered in drillings by private companies off the Mediterranean coast, has been the focus of an ongoing, heated public debate. Critics fear that the proposed deal will amount to an energy monopoly by several large companies and to a privatization of what, at least in theory, should be a public commodity. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, says that the important thing is to get the gas out of the ground as quickly as possible, something, he says, will foster a positive financial impact. But it appears that much of the public does not share this point of view.
We expect this process of approving the outline to stop. That's the first thing. The process here wasn't proper. It included lies to the public, providing false information, an unreasonable process that must stop.
Following the resignation of Israel's economy minister Aryeh Deri last week, Netanyahu is now in control of the ministry, and so in the position of fast-tracking the outline, the same outline that was opposed to by Israel's anti-monopoly regulator, who argued it did not open up the market to sufficient competition and later resigned in protest. It seems that unless the Israeli public steps up the objection, the country will find itself going down that exact path.
Now, all of these commotions or demonstrations around Israel could not have been made possible, many would say, without a mini-series called The Silver Platter, which has just started showing around Israel over the course of the last weeks. The Silver Platter, and actually one of its main characters, main stars, if you want to say, is Guy Rolnick, a famous character, a famous person here in Israel, described at times as the most influential economic journalist in Israel with unprecedented influence on discourse and government policy. And before we speak to the man himself, I would like us to take a look also at a clip from that series. There it is, Guy Rolnick.
דמיינו לעצמכם את הכלכלה הישראלית כפרדס. הפרדס הזה שייך לכולנו, ומהפירות שהוא מצמיח, כולנו נהנים. פרדס זקוק לגנן, זהו תפקידה של הממשלה. היא אחראית על טיפוח הפרדס, על חלוקה צודקת של הפירות, ועל כך שהפרדס ימשיך לתת פרי גם בשנים הבאות. אבל משהו בפרדס שלנו השתבש. גורמים בעלי אינטרסים מנצלים את כוחם כדי לאכול יותר פירות, לעקור לעצמם עצים, ולפעמים אפילו להשתלט על חלקים שלמים מהפרדס.
כן, התמונה היא קודרת. רבותיי, מי יביא שינוי? אני חושב שיש פה התפרקות של החברה.
ביבי, כנס לאלונקה, ביבי!
אני חושב שההון החברתי נשחק. אני חושב שאנשים לא סומכים אחד על השני. אני חושב שאנשים מתקשים לעבוד עבור מטרות משותפות.
גם אני רוצה לחיות את החיים שלי בכבוד במדינה הזאת!
בסופו של דבר, חברה כזאת לאט לאט מרכיבה, וחברה כזאת לא מסוגלת לקיים את עצמה.
אסור לנו להרים ידיים!
I am very honored to be joined from Chicago via Skype by Guy Rolnick himself, the founder of The Marker magazine and one of the men behind this miniseries. Mr. Rolnick, good morning to you, and actually good evening. I want to start with the recent thing that brought people out to the streets. I actually read your Facebook status calling on Israelis over the course of the last weekend to go out and demonstrate. Why did you do so?
Well, first of all, we have to say that this is quite an amazing protest, because you have here the dispersed public protesting not as a special interest group. Usually when you see demonstration all over the world and in Israel, it is a special interest group in a special sector that wants benefit from government, that wants protection from government, and is going out on the street. Here we have the opposite. We have people that are basically crying out against crony capitalism in Israel. We have people that are backing the antitrust commissioner that had to resign, that wanted competition. So it's a very interesting protest, and I believe that the Silver Platter documentary film that you mentioned actually reignited the special protests that we had in Israel 4 years ago, and people are again feeling more potent. People feel that they can influence the government in order to take better measures and better policies for the Israeli economy.
Now, I want to ask you, because it is clear that the series, and you yourself, I mean, you have been a fighting journalist for years. You clearly have an agenda, and the agenda is to get people out to the street because the situation when it comes to the financial structure of Israel needs to be changed. The main problem in your mind is what? Concentration in the Israeli financial market?
Well, the agenda is not to get people out on the street. Actually, it's not a great path to go when people have to go out on the streets. What we want to see is how the government start thinking about the public and not about special interest groups. We have a government for the past 10 years, maybe more, have been looking and catering to a lot of special interest group in Israel. We've seen what happened with a lot of monopolies in the private sector and in the public sector. And we know that those monopolies have corrupted government. We know that those monopolies have increased prices. We know that we need to change the economic system in Israel. And the only way that it happened basically in the last 4 years is when you had a lot of public pressure, and it was the social protests in the summer of 2011. And then we saw, after that social protest, we started seeing new ideas in the regulation agencies in Israel, more competition, looking at the dispersed public and not on special interests.
And not in special interests. Now, you specifically, because for many, many years, and I'm also sitting with me in studio is one of i24 News senior editors, Ruthie Sinai, who knows you also very well. But in that respect, you for years, and The Marker, and it's remarkable to see also what The Marker did with the financial agenda and putting that in front of people. What would you like to see change in Israel? And you know most likely also that many people in Israel are calling for you and another person from that series, Ron Zalika, to go into the Knesset, to run into politics. Why just preach this and not also do something and get into the system that can break it down?
Okay, so let me just reassure you that I'm not going into politics. The Marker has been very effective in the last 10 years, as you noted, to set the economic agenda in Israel and to educate people. And some of the pressure that the government got from the dispersed public is because of ideas that The Marker and other social entrepreneurs in Israel were pushing. I think we are very effective in what we are doing in the newspaper. You have to remember here that this is a newspaper, this is liberal newspapers that believe in competition, that believe in markets, but also believe that in places where there are market failures, regulation should intervene. And we have seen it in the last 4 years in the mobile and the telecom market, where we had a cartel, and we were pushing for bringing competition into that market. And when we had two competitors, after many years going into this market, prices went down 80%.
Right.
So this is a good example of what can happen if government moves against special interest groups. And we would like to see more actions like this taken.
I'm firstly happy that you're staying in journalism, but I want to refer us to some numbers because it will lead to our next question. Ruthie, when we look at part of that series also brought out Israel versus other countries. And I think to me and many of the audiences, I think the shocking differences between Israel when it comes to the OECD and our standing, such as what numbers?
Well, you know, we have a disparity in terms of government investment in social services, in higher education,
right.
in education in general. And this is going to affect the economy in a very major way. If at some point, for instance, we have this up here, we see the education, even if you're starting, you know, at a very young age,
right.
We see in the OECD you've got 14 kids per caregiver, and in Israel you've got 27 kids per caregiver. And this, you can see this along the way in the whole spectrum of education. And just one more thing, and this is going to have an effect in terms of Israel's technological edge in the future, because if you're not creating or you're not, putting out university graduates, then where are you?
Where are you?
And we're losing. We're going to lose the advantage we have.
Now, Mr. Rolnick, and I'm throwing at you a question that you suggested for the sake of full disclosure. I'm saying that, and I think it's a very good one. Is this a situation, what we're seeing happening in Israel, is this a situation that we see in other countries around the world? Are there examples that can be matched up?
Well, Israel didn't invent crony capitalism, and Israel didn't invent special interest groups that are pushing governments to create markets that are not efficient and those outcomes. We see it all over the world. We see it in Greece, we see it in Italy, we see it in many countries in Europe, and of course we see it in the United States. So actually, a lot of people come tell me, Guy, we have the same problems that you and your editors and writers in the market raise in Israel exist almost everywhere around the world. And maybe this is true, but what I think is that Israel cannot afford itself. Israel is a country in a unique environment. Israel is a country that has to be much better than any other countries. We deserve better, and we can be better. So looking at the international perspective sometimes gives us, as Ruti just mentioned, when looking at the OECD numbers, we joined the OECD several years ago, and now we have a benchmark. And on some of those parameters, we look pretty bad. And we have to deal with those issues. And even if we see some of those economic problems elsewhere, it shouldn't deter us from continuing to reform the Israeli economy and see more competition in markets and less markets that are captured by special interests.
By special interests. Now, there's some criticism, though, when it comes to this very extensive reportage done in the Silver Platter and your words and Professor Zalika's words, that there's an attempt in this, and there's criticism coming from Israel, to apoliticize the financial situation of the country.
Yes, this is true. What's different in the Silver Platter than a lot of stuff that has been happening on TV and in newspapers in Israel. Israel's media has become quite partisan in the last 10 years. We have the newspaper of the right, we have the newspaper of the left, we have newspapers of the tycoons, of the monopolists. And the nice thing about, the refreshing thing about the Silver Platter basically is that we point to problems in the economy that existed both under the left government and the right government. And if you look at the most major thing that we raised in this series, the most of the things that we raise in the market, if you look back 10 or 20 years ago, you would barely know, and you would barely be able to determine, was it a Labor government or was it a Likud government? I think that both parties in Israel are captured equally by special interest groups. The Labor has its own special interest groups. The Likud has its own special interest groups. So the fact that we are not having a partisan discussion here might be more refreshing and might maybe move the public to be more engaged and not, put a wedge in the people, so some people will not look at major economic issues because they are associated with a specific party.
But and finally, then, in order to change, though, doesn't one need to break the current order down? What are you proposing?
No, I don't think so. I think that we've seen after the social protests 2011 that if there is enough public engagement and public pressure and public support, government can do the right thing. I think that if we have that minister or that party in the parliament, that would not be enough, because we've seen both big parties, all governments captured by the same special interest. So we need to create an ecosystem with new ideas, with new values that will change the entire political spectrum and not a specific party.
One can only hope. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Rolnick, for joining us from Chicago this morning.